All right. Well, Kelly, it's great to have you here and wanted to take this opportunity to speak a little more about your Contemplative Summit, which I understand this is the second year of, and we at SDI, third year, are very excited to be collaborating with you in some small way to support it. So tell us a little bit about why this Contemplative Summit and a little bit about the history behind it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I know we've been hoping to connect a little bit more, so I'm glad we finally made it happen. Um, so the Contemplative Summit was born, I'll say out of audacity, perhaps, and just really the longing and hunger that I continue to get a sense for in the contemplative community and folks who are seeking something deeper. And as you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners know, there's a lot of hunger that isn't being met in a lot of our institutions, for better, for worse. Institutions can give wonderful structure and grounding to us. And also, I think a lot of folks haven't received the depth of interiority that they're looking for. So they seek out spiritual direction, they seek out depth, formation, guidance. And so I know that's something that we share as organizations, but I as I was looking around at the contemplative scene, there are some very large organizations. You know, there's SDI, there's the Center for Action and Contemplation, there's Shalem, there's some really wonderful ones. And then there are also tons of grassroots organizations and grassroots speakers and teachers and leaders and facilitators who have amazing wisdom. And so being able to offer a space where folks can come together who might not necessarily sign up for, a year-long program or have resources to attend all sorts of things, to be able to offer a free space where everybody can come gather and we can offer a platform not only for, the names that we all know and love. This year we're having Parker Palmer and Father Greg Boyle and people that I know SDI knows and loves as well, but also offering some of those hidden gems and people who don't always get the platform quite as broadly. So it's fun to be able to offer that mixture to everyone.
Yeah, that's a wonderful mix of wise elders and wise newcomers, I guess is how I would describe them. And so just a couple more questions about the Contemplative Summit. You had great success. You've had great success for the last couple of years, I guess, doing this. And is it right that you attracted 30,000 people the first year? Did I get that
Oh
right?
gosh, that's our hope. That's our hope,
Oh,
Seifu.
okay.
We had 10,000 last year, and so we're hoping that it'll be about 15,000 this year. But from what we could come up with, we were like, I think this could be the largest contemplative gathering. Correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody listening, if you think that there's something else going on, I'm happy to stand corrected. But it's fun to be able to draw folks from all over the place.
It's a really wonderful opportunity to gather this many people around contemplation as a practice, and so what's give me a couple of desired outcomes, and knowing that this is a road without a destination, right? So it's more about exploration and discovery and immersion and experience. But what's your hope? What is one big hope that you have with this summit?
Great question. And I'd love to answer in a variety of ways, but I'll start with the goal of anything that we do at Spiritual Wanderlust, our organization that's sponsoring this, is I like to say we want to support people on their path to wholeness and divine union. And I use both of those things because I think it's easy sometimes to limit the spiritual life to seeking, contemplative bliss and silence and some sort of almost monastic ideal that it's easy to romanticize, let's put it that way. But I like to think of the contemplative life, of the spiritual life, as very holistic and seeking wholeness and divine union. I mean, we can get into that if you want. But I like to be able to offer things that are beyond just practices, let's say. So we will have daily practices of a variety. We'll have a writing practice, we'll have a somatic embodied practice, we'll have a musical one, and oh, and then another one with like singing bowls and different things like that. So we'll have practices. And I'm also very excited to offer things like we're going to have a conversation about what it looks like to have a spiritual practice or a spirituality when you're neurodivergent. Like how does different wiring of our brains and bodies affect our spirituality? We talk a lot about apophatic prayer and contemplative circles, where it's, dropping into kind of nothingness. And yet, in the Christian tradition, they would at least there say that all we have control over is the cataphatic, like what we do. And all, so we're going to talk about the cataphatic. We're going to talk about inner work. We're going to talk especially about suffering, which can be an uncomfortable topic, but is an important one, I think, especially this year. And so our theme this year is the spacious heart and how to hold suffering with love. So that's um, I could go again into all of these things, but I think supporting folks in their journey toward that wholeness, toward divine union, learning what it means to make space for all of life and reality and how it shows up, even when it might be uncomfortable. And I know your session is going to explore those themes as well. So we've got lots to deepen into, because it's not easy in these times to stretch open when we'd rather constrict.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. The spacious heart. I think a lot of folks have this notion that contemplation, that the desired outcome is what in Buddhism we would call a walk through samadhi land, right?
Mm,
Through some kind of earthly paradise where we don't suffer, where we are able to navigate seamlessly and flow freely. And it's wonderful to visit those spaces, but none of us get to live there.
hmm.
Right. And the opposite is also true. None of us are destined to live forever in suffering and in discomfort and in pain. But these are difficult times. And so navigating through both the pure land and the mud of the universe is part of the opportunity. Both are equal. In fact, a lot of people would argue that going through the suffering actually creates a greater opportunity. So say a little bit about something, the spacious heart, encompassing this theme of difficulty and heartbreak, and how to navigate not just discomfort but pain and struggles.
Yes. Well, I'll start by saying I don't think any of us have all of the answers. It's although if you had asked me at age, 19 when I took my first metaphysics class and I had to, write a paper on the problem of evil, I was like, oh, yep, I think I solved it. Which, again, that's kind of how we like to think in the first half of our lives. We're like, oh, yeah, this is not a problem. Clean answers, we've got certainty. But I think most of the folks who will be listening here know that life is much more about the questions than the answers. So I'll use all of that as a caveat to say suffering, as you mentioned, can be a real opportunity for opening. And I had a quote here from Parker Palmer, who's going to be speaking, who had a great line about this. Oh, he was talking about his season of depression, and how he had such a hard time imagining the end to that. And he said, the pain forced me down into the roots of my own being, and there in the soil of my soul, I learned that suffering is not the opposite of wholeness, it is the condition of it. Suffering is the condition of our wholeness. And I think most spiritual paths would teach us that we need to make space for the light and the dark, for all of the shadow, whether it's interior or exterior to us, for both stillness and for action, for all of the emotions that bring us discomfort. And also, because sometimes those are what push us into the next stage of growth that we need. You know, anger can lead us into action, and grief can hollow out places in our hearts and spaciousness that we need for compassion. So I think all of those are important to be able to um, have a capacity for. And again, I'm belying my Catholic roots here, but capax Dei is the Latin that they would use in Catholic theology for being able to have a capacity for the divine and for all the gifts in whatever shape they come. And that is especially true in that kind of Christian core symbol of the cross, right? That is something that can be really redemptive in a very mysterious way.
Yeah, it was so beautifully said. I've been studying religions and spiritualities for a few decades now, and I'm still looking for a spiritual leader, a religious leader whose spiritual evolution and spiritual maturity, path to spiritual maturity, wasn't premised on a broken heart
Mhm.
and calamities, not just small inconveniences or discomforts, but a major breakdown to major breakthrough. And you just spoke about Christ on the cross, looking up and going, "Why have you forsaken me?" And that is true of the Buddha, and that is true of Muhammad. It is true of so many of the religious and spiritual leaders. It almost seems like the price of admission, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, it's true. I mean, and I sometimes chuckle when I've heard Richard Rohr say, the path to the second half of life is either through a great love or a great suffering. And I'm like, I don't know who goes through the path of great love, because everyone I've met is through the path of suffering. And it's um I think for most of us, it's something that you simultaneously wouldn't wish on anyone and kind of wish for everyone at the same time. Just because of the places that it brings you. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do rapid fire if you're okay with this.
sure.
So, Contemplative Summit bringing thousands of people together is obviously the community manifest, right? Whatever, however you refer to that community, the larger community, the Ummah, the Sangha, the body of Christ, whatever your description of it. It is an opportunity for people to come together. So tell me a little bit about your notion of spiritual community, particularly as it relates to the spacious heart.
Mm. I my read of these contemplative circles of seekers, people who are going beyond um, what I like to call the white picket fences of spirituality, the kind of religious institutions that we've been often raised in. The two greatest desires I hear are depth and community. People are hungry for something rich, something that they can sink their teeth into, and also for someone who can mirror their own journey or walk alongside them. And so that to me is such a core part of our paths. And so you see it in all the institutions, of course. Like people are drawn to this common fire, spark, inspiration, whatever leader. And that sense of organizing ourselves and finding ways to find and connect with the divine, not only in this kind of vertical, transcendent way, but also in the very horizontal, incarnate way. And so the community, not only of other humans, but the community of all creatures and land and rivers. So to me, community is a very expansive, inclusive term and is something that honestly I feel like a lot of us newer spiritual organizations and movements are still figuring out. Like, what does it look like for those who aren't really comfortable with institutions or have been hurt by institutions? What does it look like for those of us, especially who are just gathering online? I know lots of folks who have local centering prayer groups or find, meditation at their local yoga studio or different places of that sort, which awesome. And when you don't have something like that locally, being able to find something online or wherever to find a way that you can see others, look another person in the eyes and say, "Oh, you too? You get this?" That's one of my favorite things whenever we do small groups and other, live kind of community-based encounters is others who say like, "Oh," one woman would always say like, "Oh, I finally found other spiritual weirdos," like to have others to journey with. So I think that's a really important part and part.
Yeah, yeah. So let me shift for a moment to ask you about spiritual wanderlust, a name that I love. I think it's evocative of spiritual longing, discovery, exploration, and this is a journey that, as we've said, never ends, and the ability to recreate, like God is neuroplastic, right?
Hmm.
And at our best, we're neuroplastic in ourselves as well, and that's when we are able to manifest the universe of endless, truly endless possibilities. But I like the whimsy of the title, and I wonder if you can explain a little bit about its origin and why you named your organization that.
Yes, I'm glad you picked up on the whimsy because I like to say spiritual wanderlust is depth with a wink. We like to include the sacred mischief and the levity that also comes in the spiritual path. But the core of it was inspired, as you mentioned, by that sense of longing, and you'll find in mystics of basically any path this restlessness, this ache, this something that draws them. Sometimes it's almost like a nostalgic, longing for a home that we're not quite sure we've ever been to or can't put words to. You can find it, way back in the Greeks talking about eros, this fire that the gods put within us. And so that sense of longing, of restlessness is certainly what inspires spiritual wanderlust. And it's to me really beautiful to meditate on the fact that this is to go back to the Greeks, the eros, this is something, the fire of the gods that they put within us, that God inspired and placed God's own longing within us, so that even when that longing feels just like emptiness, that spaciousness again is really at the same time presence, which doesn't necessarily make the ache go away, but it can also help us befriend it, I think, in another way. So, longing is a big part of the inspiration behind spiritual wanderlust. And I'll also say the celebration of mystery, again, instead of certitude or answers that don't quite feel like they match up with the nuances of reality, to be able to celebrate awe and things that we can't quite pin down. Um, I had a great theology professor in college in my undergrad who would always say, "We must not murder to dissect." He would say, like, in order, sometimes we want to analyze and pull things apart, but in doing so, it's like you kill the mystery of it. If you pin down a butterfly to dissect it, you've killed the butterfly and the mystery that it is. So it's all tied up with wonder, with beauty, with mystery. And I sometimes like to use the analogy of spiritual off-roading, which is a name of one of our programs we're going to be relaunching this fall. But I think a lot of folks who grew up in this spiritual suburbia of white picket fences and knowing exactly, what's allowed and what's not, there's approved color palettes, and we know exactly what, the HOA allows and all of that. And somehow, often through a great crisis, we're dropped in the spiritual equivalent of like the Yukon up in Canada, just this stunning wilderness that is beautiful and breathtaking, and at the same time, a little bit terrifying because who knows how to survive out there. And so I like to think of spiritual wanderlust as supporting folks on that spiritual off-roading journey where there is wilderness and there are also trails in the wilderness. Folks are welcome to explore the Christian path, the Buddhist path, the Jewish path, whatever. But what I hope at Spiritual Wanderlust is that we can equip people with those core tools and skills like how do you read your inner compass, out here in the wilderness? How do you chart the stars? How do you pitch a tent? How do you live in this wide wilderness that is out here and familiarize yourself with some of the more common terrains like, you know, discernment and embodiment and divine intimacy and all of those things. So I could I could go in many directions with all of that, but I'll pause there.
Well, this is the first, I think, of more conversations to come. The mystery and the mystical path is. I remember reading William James, that tip of the tongue experience. You can almost taste it. You can almost feel it. I describe it as like, looking over my left shoulder, suddenly
Yeah.
something is there, and it's not it's inviting, but it's also, you use the word terrifying. I always use the word eerie.
Mm.
There's an eeriness to it. There's a there's a promise. It's kind of like jumping off, 30 feet up or 50 feet
Mhm.
up or whatever, or off an airplane or whatever it is. But there's this sense of promise and also, imminent dissolution that accompanies it, right?
Yes. It's the already but not yet. You like get a taste, but it's not everything. I mean, that's what drives the mystics mad. I mean, you read John of the Cross's poetry and he's like, give it to me now. He's just like aflame with almost this frustration. So you can understand why so many of the mystics use that kind of spousal imagery where they're just like, oh my gosh, you're such a tease.
Yeah.
I give it to me now, give it all to me. And, I
Don't
don't
hold
want to be a
back.
saint by
Don't
halves,
hold
as
back.
some
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
Good. All right, let's see. Spiritual direction, because I know you're a spiritual director, and I know it's an important part of what you do at Spiritual Wanderlust. And so, our theme for, we have themes for the years, and the theme for next year is kind of how to navigate as a spiritual director and spiritual companion in a world filled with increasing moral injury, and not just with a view to withstand or be resilient, survive and overcome, but actually how to thrive, in that world, and how to, model examples of, how to be happy in
Mm.
that environment. I mean, all these cycles all go through history, and Hegel talked about the cycles of history, and it's not the first time where we are in a difficult cycle, and it could get much worse, and then it'll come back out the other end. So tell me about, as a spiritual director yourself, how can spiritual directors respond to these particularly challenging times?
Yeah, what a question. No wonder you're doing it for a whole year because I mean it's well worth the reflection. Um, what I'll say first is I think it's an invitation to settle into paradox. And as anyone who's been through grief knows, it's weird, but it happens where you will feel joy and soul-crushing grief, sometimes in the same day or at the same time. And it's not something that you can always explain clearly in words, but I think that's one thing that we're trying to make space for this year because it would understandably be either naive or I don't know, ignorant, I suppose, to just say like I'm happy all the time despite all of the suffering going on, within and around me. So there isn't, I think of the Celts and how the Celtic world would often say there's never sorrow without joy, and there's never joy without sorrow. Like they're always present together. So remembering that as we seek to thrive in the midst of all the insanity, to me, the most important practice is learning to be a a vessel with a hole in the bottom of it, something that all of these things can pass through because as any spiritual director knows, if you try to hold and keep everything that people share with you, along with holding and keeping all the things that you're trying to process from the news and from your neighbors and community and family, there's no possible way. Like, we don't have infinite hearts to be able to hold all of infinity. But if we are able to be held by the divine, and allow everything to pass through us as some sort of vessel, to me, that's the closest we can come to thriving in the midst of all of the pain and offering ourselves as a sort of I'm trying to remember who said this. It might have been Sister Wendy Beckett, if I'm remembering correctly, who was saying that we need to be like spiritual dialysis for the world. Like, how the kidneys, when they don't function, you got to get dialysis, who will then kind of clean out all the stuff that the waste, the things that take away from life. And so we as spiritual directors, I think, have that vocation of being that spiritual dialysis of taking some of the greatest pain and transmuting it as kindness and sending out peace back into the world. Or another analogy you might use is, thinking of that fungal network in the forest, and how there are so many trees who are, younger and can't reach the sun on top of the canopy, or diseased, or whatever the case might be. But there are those trees that can reach the sun, which can also be scorching, and it reaches the soil, which also has just filth and dirt and things that we don't like so much, the creepy crawlies. But the trees somehow can transmute all of this into food, fuel, support, grace for the rest of the trees that they are interconnected with. And so I think that's one thing that we are called to do, is somehow transmute that suffering into grace, goodness, life, abundance for others.
Yeah, very much like what you said. I would say, this is how we turn um, crap into fertilizer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Spiritual, our suffering into actually the fertilizer for our spiritual evolution, and not just ours, but everyone's.
Hmm,
Because
hmm.
there's no separation between us and other people, really.
Right.
Um, so, okay, I mean, we could talk here for hours, but I'm going to keep you for just 5 more minutes. So I've been intrigued as the ED of SDI about collaborating with you and collaborating with Spiritual Wanderlust, and this is a wonderful opportunity to initiate that collaboration. And I wonder if you going back to this theme of community, but particularly a theme of community of spiritual directors, of spiritual companions, of spiritual seekers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how we help each other along the way, how we help each other navigate up a mountain or down into a valley. Um, Not just in this time, but through all times. It's like we're playing a relay race through history, where this torch keeps being passed to the next person and the next person. And Buddhism we use the candle, a single candle that can light thousands of other candles. And so, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. As we know, there's so much more strength when we are supporting each other. And to me, that that image of, let's say, the body of Christ, or you can use that network of the forest, of the trees and the fungal network that supports them all. There's so much strength when we are able to support each other through all the craziness of the world. And to go back to that example of transmuting suffering and pain and all the grit of our lives, I think being intentional about sending loving kindness, if you want to, use the kind of meta meditation in that sense for each other. There's that on a very intangible level where I'm able to offer something that is really painful for me today and say, like, hey, I know, SeiFu is going through something really challenging at work right now, or, my friend Nora is really feeling the pain of the world at the moment. Maybe I can send some sense of grace, of support, of hope through this wonderful, intangible network that we have. So there's that on, if you want the more mystical level. On somewhat more practical level, though still very interior, I think being able to provide space for each other and that container and safe space. I know a lot of folks who have peer groups or supervision groups, or at the very least have their own spiritual director, but finding opportunities, making time to actually hold the container, hold the space for each other, because there's a lot of emotion in the world, and rightly so. There's a whole lot going on that can easily yank our emotions in one direction or another. So I think being able to provide that kind of support as we process things, and offer some sense of levity too when you need to be able to laugh and send a silly meme or cat video along. Those are important too. My husband and I have started at least a few times a week before bed, like sharing our favorite little like funny reels or shorts or little videos, just for a sense of levity in the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, I'll conclude by asking you to extend an invitation to the SDI community and to spiritual directors to attend the Contemplative Summit and in whatever way you want to.
Yes, absolutely. We warmly invite and welcome everyone from the SDI community to join us at the Contemplative Summit. I like to attempt at Spiritual Wanderlust to provide the richness and the depth that isn't as readily available in all of our meditation 101 classes. And I know that the community at Spiritual Directors International are the people who are hungry for the intermediate levels, going beyond just like, hey, I've learned to meditate, but I know there are so many people who are hungry for just being taken further up and farther in, as C.S. Lewis would put it. And I hope that that is something that you'll be able to find with us at the Contemplative Summit. And we'd be happy for you to share it with anyone else that you think might be hungry for similar explorations in this wild and wonderful world of spirituality.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kelly. One final question, which is anything else that you might want to bring up?
Great question. If anyone is hungry for any other explorations, I would love to welcome folks to see what we're all about at Spiritual Wanderlust. This year, we're going through some modern mystics and prophets. Everybody from John Muir, John Philip Newell is speaking about John Muir next month, and then we've got all sorts of other fun ones coming up very soon. So we are happy to have folks explore and journey with us as they feel so drawn.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly.
Absolutely. Thank you, SeiFu.